This is the Definitely Uncertain podcast, brought to you by Gold Rock Capital. Each week, we look at how high net worth families can improve their lives, decisions, and investments in a deeply uncertain world. We always aim to provide practical information, even if we can't offer specific investment advice. This is the Definitely Uncertain podcast, and my name is Darren Rockman. I'm a partner at Gold Rock, the 25-year-old multifamily office servicing high net worth families in Israel and around the world. And today on the podcast, Eric Reiner from Vine Ventures. Hey, Eric.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you for joining. Thank you. So Eric is a founder and managing partner at Vine Ventures. We'll learn a little bit about what they're doing soon. Prior to that, he was a partner at Sarona Ventures in New York, and then before that, he was an investor at Insight Venture Partners back earlier in his career. Eric is across a whole lot of technology sectors and is a sector expert. So we thought to bring him on to hear a little bit about what's going on in the Israeli venture world, how it's being impacted by the big global changes, and a few other topics. So Eric, start off by telling us how you got to be in Israel and how you got to be in venture.
Sure. So I grew up in Westport, Connecticut, to an incredible, supportive family who always encouraged me to follow my passion. I went for undergrad to Northwestern. While I was at Northwestern, I went on Birthright and completely fell in love with Israel and really just felt at home from the minute that I stepped foot here. I then went to come study abroad here for 6 months during my junior year. And had the opportunity to intern at Patango under Jaime Perez, which was an incredible experience and really opened my eyes to the fact that venture capital was more than just this kind of thing that I can do at some point in my career, but something that I wanted to do now. I got back to Northwestern. Thank God I met my wife. We now have 2 kids, Sophie and Salo, and are expecting our third. Wow. Was really fortunate that while I was there, I heard about this, relatively to where it is now, small firm called Insight Venture Partners, which was also investing in Israel. And I was really fortunate to have the opportunity to start my career there. So I worked there for 2 years, was, looking at stuff both in the US and Israel, was an incredible experience. I then left to join a company that I had sourced while I was at Insight called Dynamic Yield, which was a few years back acquired by McDonald's for roughly $300 million. And then from there, I've been basically on this journey to build what I hope to be the most successful venture capital firm in the world, specifically focusing on what I consider to be the 2 most important ecosystems in the world, US and Israel. My first kind of foray into that was with a family office where we formed a fund called Sinai Ventures, where we were kind of stage agnostic, sector agnostic investors, non-lead investors, and we're really fortunate to be early investors in a number of companies, including Carta and Hippo and Row and Dutchy and Uncork and Front. And since then have teamed up with a wonderful group of people to build a more institutional, diversified LP base, and build a new firm called Vine Ventures. That was about 5 years ago. Where, again, kind of this is, very much impossible to separate from me. It is what I will do for the rest of my life. It is my life's work, my life's passion. And we opened an office here, really to kind of go deep on the thesis that there is an opportunity to build a new US-Israel early stage venture capital firm focused on seed. We, thank God, opened an office here about 3 years ago. And then, I had always had the dream of living here, but never felt like it was a reality. And then having spent a summer here with my wife and 2 kids, having worked here and having made several successful investments here, my wife was, thank God, very enthusiastic about us staying. So we did. And it's been the most satisfying, professional, personal, and spiritual decision that I ever made in my life, and feel really grateful now to be kind of building Vine here, building my family here, and hopefully helping to build the country.
Well, it's a great story. You're like the Aliyah poster boy, and bless you for it. So that's great.
Thank you.
You come actually with an interesting perspective because you sort of started here, had at a great firm, went to work for a world-beating firm at Insight, then did your own thing, built it in the US, and now you've come here. Given that perspective, what do you see that makes Israel a global powerhouse in the venture world?
Sure. I think it's the, I mean, just to reflect back, like on my way to Birthright, I read Startup Nation. And I think, nothing really has changed as it relates to the foundations of what makes this economy such a prolific contributor to the world GDP of generally and of technology. And I think, I'll speak about what those aspects are, but I think we're also in the early innings of a new revolution as it relates to technology in Israel, which is going after what I would call real world problems. So I think historically Israel has been an absolute powerhouse in cyber and infra technology and similar. However, I believe there is a renaissance that's occurring now with the emergence of AI and similar technologies, whereby the military experience, the kind of tight knit ecosystem here, the funding environment, and the kind of just general grit and kind of resilience of the typical Israeli child and teenager and college student and worker, I think has contributed meaningfully to the ability for this country to emerge as the most, the second most important country in the world as it relates to technology.
Right.
And I think, like you've seen in the past, companies like Wix and Rapid and gaming companies and similar, I think you're going to see a tremendous proliferation of this experience that these founders have had, these employees have had over these last several years in the midst of a war, and you're going to see, kind of magic sprouting from that. And so
Right.
I think to speak about the aspects specifically that make the country so, ripe for this sort of innovation, it really comes down to, the things that I mentioned earlier, the resilience of the country, the military training, and the, basically the need, the existential need to build a global business from day one.
Right. Talk to me a little bit about the tight-knit nature. You used those words before of the ecosystem here, because I think for outsiders and even for some people that live here, it's sort of hard to understand how that works. So maybe try and describe it for the audience.
Yeah. So just to give you a sense, like I'm zooming in from Sarona Market, Tel Aviv right now, where our office is a house in the middle of this park where there's, multiple skyscrapers around here. There are multiple offices of global venture capital firms like Lightspeed and Bessemer and Sequoia and Index, as well as multinational corporations like Amazon and Meta and similar, and then startups like, or quote unquote startups like Wiz and Sierra and Island and others, which are all within a few hundred meters from each other, right? That does not exist anywhere in the world. And so when I
Not
say
even in
tight knit,
Silicon
I
Valley.
mean not even in Silicon Valley. And so when I say tight knit, I mean, I'm looking out my window right now to entrance B of Sarona Market, and I just saw, two founders, two kind of celebrity style founders walking by, right? Just walking by in a t-shirt. And so I think the fact that everyone is a call or an email away, and frankly, for the most part, because of the we're all in this together approach to the Israeli, technology development, I think people are inclined to help. Um, and that creates, everyone kind of feels like, even though, and we'll speak about this later, we have had some issues as it relates to unity and kind of helping each other. I think in the end of the day, we all, woke up this morning at 7:30 a.m., to while our kids were getting ready for school to a missile coming from Yemen. And that shared reality, you can kind of you can have different political views, you can have different religious views, but ultimately we all, experienced a, jihadist, fundamentalist military militia, try to kill all of us and all of our families. And that alone is something that can really bring people together. And I think is why the close knit, aspect of this ecosystem is so prolific and profound. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not fiercely competitive, whereby, I might be having lunch with a close friend and then, be sitting with a founder right after who I'm directly competing with to invest in. But, it does mean that when push comes to shove, we're all in it together.
Right, right. And you mentioned also, the phone call and the fact that, in Israel, it's easy to get to other people. People are open. It's a very informal networking environment as opposed to maybe, certainly in Europe, but even in the United States.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay. From time to time, you hear sort of rumors or scaremongering about a brain drain to this country, and clearly, with now into almost 2 years of war here. We're we're not we don't live in a bubble. People can move around. From your vantage point, do you see that as a problem?
Zero.
Okay, zero. That's the best thing I heard all day.
I mean, look, I think, we have many founders who are, all excited to go spend some time in America to help expand their businesses. But ultimately, all of them, that I know plan to come back. I know there's reports of people, seeking to move to Portugal or, similar. Like, I just, I don't see how that can work, professionally. I think, you know, uh, a lot of them, maybe moving to the US for, short amounts of time or even longer periods of time. But, I would argue that even the Israelis that move to America, they're still deeply ingratiated into the Israeli technology ecosystem. And so I think, the location of them is obviously important. Ultimately, like, we want as many people as possible to stay here, but I think it's mostly for economic reasons. And ultimately, I think, the joke is like wherever, Ima's Ima is where, Abba is going to end up, or wherever Abba's Ima is wherever Ima is going to end up. And I think,
For those who don't speak
generally,
Hebrew, Abra is dad
yeah,
and Ima is mum.
yeah. So I think generally speaking, like I've not seen any of it
Right.
in my portfolio. I've not seen any of it amongst employees. Um, in fact, quite the opposite. I think there's a new trend where effectively, founders believe that they can actually build their companies out of Israel. The
Yeah.
four founders of Wiz lived in Israel throughout their entire 5 years of building Wiz into a $32 billion company. So I think Monday.com, the whole executive team is here. Wix, the entire executive team is here.
Yeah.
And I think that model will proliferate because I think, frankly, quality of life here is just so beyond what it could ever be in America for a number of reasons. That it's just going to proliferate and become even more pronounced.
Right. How do you see the success of Israel in light of the war? There has been just this ongoing engine of technology, despite manpower issues, despite disturbance to life, despite the mental health problems. How is that happening? How do you see it reflected through your portfolio?
Resilience. You know, my daughter this morning, as we were, going down into the bomb shelter in our basement, because again, the Houthis had sent a missile towards us to kill our families. She goes, "Oh, the Houthis are so annoying." My 5-year-old daughter. And I think, look, I think, it just it's impossible to teach that to an American kid who grew up in, Westport, Connecticut, like I did,
Yeah.
unless you experience it. And I think like that alone, is just it's such a I mean, look, the best entrepreneurs, the best, business leaders, the best, leaders, period, have all been through resilience. And I think every single Israeli child, every single Israeli teenager, every single Israeli, kid that goes to the military, um, and has seen, the suffering and has seen the trauma, right? It's just a different level of sophistication and maturity. than anything, a coddled child in America who, has been in after school programs their whole life to, to be able to get into, an Ivy League school to just be,
Yeah.
ridiculed for being Jewish. Like, I think it's just a completely different perspective on life.
Yep. Yep. I hear you. Okay, so let's now swing to some of the things you're doing inside the portfolio and how that relates to the overall opportunity set that you're seeing here in Israel. You mentioned before that you believe that Israel is on the verge of um, a whole new way of going about investing. You said that you see Israel moving into a whole new area, which was addressing real world problems. So maybe explain to us, what do you mean by real world problems?
Yeah, I mean, effectively moving from what was traditionally a market of IT services and software into, I would consider tech-enabled services. So instead of going after tech spend, going after global GDP. And I think, obviously AI, transforms every single industry, including, I mean, just to give you a few examples, real estate and energy and, labor, I mean, labor generally, robotics, right?
Right.
I think so. Um, I think a lot of people have primarily considered Israel to be a leader in that software and IT spend. But I think you're seeing more and more that these Israeli founders are, focused on these like really, really big, chunky problems like healthcare and financial services and similar, and frankly have achieved immense success already.
Give us
And
an
so I think
example or
what
two.
we're seeing, sure, one example is a company that we're investors in called Remapi. Um, Remapi is founded by a third-time founder. Her first company she co-founded, her name is Michal Tzor. She founded with Naftali Bennett, the former prime minister of Israel, a cybersecurity company, which was acquired for mid hundreds of millions. Her second company was a video infrastructure company called Kaltura, and that company went public. Um, and now this is her third company, and her entire focus is on healthcare. And so she basically discovered, out of one of the top research institutions in Israel, this technology that would greatly increase the efficacy of pharmaceutical drugs by using digital experiences. So it's literally an app that can either trigger parts of your brain that can make the ability to, absorb or to interact with these drugs in a much more uh, efficacious way. And it can also, ensure adherence, and it's going to be FDA approved, and it will be AI driven, it will be adaptive, and similar. Um, and that's a woman who, her previous two companies were hardcore infrastructure, and her company now is going after, pharmaceutical companies and
Right.
and selling to
With ultimate
customers, right?
application onto the direct onto the consumer rather than in the back with the
Exactly.
architecture.
Well, the architecture is important, but like ultimately they're selling to pharmaceutical companies in order to sell to consumers, and also,
Sure.
frankly, confident, well, not confidential, whatever. I think they've made it clear that they plan to eventually release their own drugs.
Right.
Um, and I think the beauty of this case study is that basically there is such a you know ecosystem of founders who are looking for mission driven opportunities. And I'm not talking about necessarily curing cancer. I'm talking about things that align with their personal interests. Like in this case, she had a personal experience with Parkinson's and realized that this digital drug could have a meaningful impact on that specific indication.
Got it. Um, Talk to me a little bit about, this all obviously relates to AI, because that is making, so much more possible. And you guys have been investors in, a bunch of startups in the field, companies like Carter and Kodu. I think I pronounced that right. When you're investing in these, what are you looking for? And, what are the things that you're maybe not looking for or careful to avoid?
Yeah. We're looking for the same thing we've been looking for since my time at Insight, which is high quality, highly defensible, highly integrated, and highly distribution driven technology businesses. So these are businesses that, in historically, um, have been driven by, high growth and high retention and high gross margin and high operating leverage. And AI simply contributes to that or enables it. We are not necessarily looking at AI as you know, I think a lot of people are like, oh, technology is so much easier to build now using AI. So like, why is there even a necessity to like why are we investing in software anymore? And look, I think, the perfect example is what happened last week, which is Google or Alphabet, which literally invented Transformers, which is the foundation of all of these LLMs. They decided that they have no capacity or wherewithal to build a company or product like Wiz. So they bought it for $32 billion in cash after having previously offered 23 billion just a few months earlier.
Yeah.
And so I think in the end of the day, we're not looking for anything different. I think this AI movement is going to significantly affect every aspect of software, but I think generally for the better.
Right.
And so, right now we are, spending a lot of time in the defense market, and Israel has a right to win in that market. And so we're closing an investment now in a company that's leveraging edge AI or, AI in, the edge, which basically means on cameras and drones and all this, other sort of stuff to basically enable very, very fast and human in the loop decision making, hopefully to defend, countries like Israel and our democratic allies.
Right. Right. Are you seeing post-war a big meaningful increase in the number of defense-related companies?
Yes.
Right. And how do you think about that? One of the traditional problems that defense-related companies have had is the presence of big, large integrators who tend to buffer between the end market, which, armies, navies, and startups. How are you dealing with that problem? How are you approaching that?
Yeah. So we've chosen to invest in folks that are more seasoned, more experienced than like the traditional kind of um, kind of first time founder, young, these are first time, the kind of young, kind of inexperienced in the procurement and lobbying process type founders. So we've specifically focused either on completely bleeding edge technology that's irreplaceable and
Hmm.
you know, effectively unable to, uh, even create something like this, or integration systems that are driven by leaders who have, either existed in the military industrial complex for, many, many years or, have some unique distribution advantage.
Right. Interesting. Okay. I just want to take you back to the AI discussion. There's sort of a debate, and we're going to just spitball the future here for a minute. There's a debate that seems to be raging between two schools of thought. One school of thought says AI is going to radically change the way we work, radically change the jobs that are out there, but ultimately this is another a step change in, a big step change and a much, much faster step change, but another step change in the road's technology. There's a second school of thought, which is everybody's going to be unemployed, or just about everybody. That ultimately the future for AI and robotics together is that where the number of actual humans that are going to need to do the types of work that we're doing now, or any type of work, is going to radically shrink. Where do you sit in that debate?
I sit on the technology enabling humans side of that debate. I think there will certainly be jobs that are replaced, but I think, generally speaking, the economy is changing fast. And, as the economy changes, it will require humans that understand, the way things work. And I think across, manufacturing, you'll probably see, a significant drop in labor. I think across, other industries, you'll see an increase. And so I think all in all, what this is going to allow or enable is humans to use what I would call like their seichel, like their wisdom
Yeah.
in order to really, their conscious, their spirituality, their to create real like empathy with other people that I just fundamentally don't believe AI will ever be able to do. And I think that'll be a really compelling chapter in humanity.
Right. Okay. Um, we talked a little bit before about unity and some of the challenges that Israel is going on a social and political side. Vine Ventures, you guys have committed yourselves and resources to something called the Sarona Unity Center. Tell us a little bit about what that is and what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, sure. So um, I'm very very influenced and inspired by Reb Cook, the first chief rabbi of Israel. And where I live in South Tel Aviv in Neve Tzedek, there's an old synagogue of his. That was where he lived, primarily, and it's connected to a metallurgical factory.
Hmm.
And the theme was, you know, um, the development of the land, the development of society, the development of the economy is not only a mitzvah, but it's also connected to Torah learning, and it's connected to unity, and it was connected in that day to his yeshiva. And so, what I hoped to create here in Sarona is an office, and then above that, a kind of community unity center where we've had, I mean, the core of it is really Haredi and kind of non-Haredi integration and collaboration and discussion and frankly mutual respect. And thank God we've managed to have tens of Haredim learning coding here.
So that's
We've had
ultra
multiple.
Orthodox
Yes,
Israelis who've tended to be on the periphery of the core of economy here, and in some ways on the periphery of mainstream Israeli society. And it's a very, very large and growing part of the population.
yes. Thank you for clarifying that. And so look, I think this is a country where you have, unfortunately, big divides politically and religiously between people, but ultimately it's a democracy. And I think obviously in that process, just like it's happened in America and many other places in the world where there's thriving democracies, very very electric and um I would say, heated debate and protests and disagreements. And I think ultimately that, is what creates a healthy democracy and a healthy economy. However, in the case of Israel, just due to our history of disunity and that disunity creating our biggest weaknesses, and our biggest our times where we were able to be really hurt, and the times of the first and second temple and similar, and I think that unity is something that is at our fingertips, and it just needs to be um really shown the light. And I think when secular Tel Avivians see ultra Orthodox Yerushalmis learning coding in a Sarona office, I think it gives both of them hope. And I think that's really the most important thing, is that mutual respect and mutual hope. And again, going back to our my first point, and realization that the Houthim and the Syrians and the Hezbollah and
And Iran.
Hamas, they don't and Iran, they don't see us differently. They see us all as the same, as just dirty, you know, uh, dirty Jews. And I think it's really important that we all remember that we are all connected and we're all in this together.
Yeah. Um, that you're sort of taking a bottom up approach, which
Yeah, for sure.
clearly is really important because it's foundational. How does that bottom up approach meet the top down divisions? So you gave an example of Tel Avivians coming and seeing secular Tel Avivians seeing ultra Orthodox people coding. Um, does that then create a greater pushback where everybody sort of starts to understand that maybe our differences aren't as great as what our commonalities?
For sure. That's the whole idea. And I think what I've seen through this work that we've done is that, unfortunately, a lot of the divide is actually coming from the leadership and not from the people themselves. And
Yeah.
I think the more that people realize that, the better off that we'll all be, and frankly, the greater influence we can have on our politicians.
Yeah. Great. Well, on that really, really positive note, Eric Reiner, Vine Ventures, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It was such a
It
pleasure
was
to meet you.
a pleasure to meet you too. It was fascinating. And anybody that wants to get in touch with Eric, so you can just look him up on Vine Ventures, or you can contact Goldrock, and we will be back with more podcasts coming your way soon. Thanks, Eric, and goodbye to everybody.
Thank you.